Hi kindergarten friends! So in our last Stuart Little video we read chapter 1 and we remember chapter 1 it was called In the Drain, and in chapter 1 it kind of introduced us to Stuart Little, so it told us about this little Stuart Little guy, the main character, and it also had a problem where his mother dropped the ring into the sink and they didn't know how to get it out, and they tried to use different things to get it out, but they just didn't work. So then they sent Stuart in, and Stuart was able to get it out. And talking about all these things that Stuart can do that no one else in the family could do, and so all the things he did to help people. So today we're reading the next chapter, and the next chapter is called Home Problems. So get ready, because it's going to be probably another wild ride. Okay, so I'm going to start reading, and you picture it in your mind and read it just like you would a movie, except for you're playing the movie in your mind as you listen to the words I'm reading. And when there's a picture, I'll show you. All right, picture it in your mind. Stuart was also helpful when it came to ping pong. The Littles liked ping pong, but the balls had a way of rolling under chairs, sofas, and radiators, and this meant that the players were forever stooping down and reaching under things. Stuart soon learned to chase balls. It was such a great sight to see him come out from under a hot radiator, pushing a ping pong ball with all of his might. The perspiration rolled down his cheeks, so that's kind of like sweat, like when you do something and you work really hard and you start sweating. So perspiration rolling down his cheeks. The balls, of course, were almost as high as he was, and he had to throw his whole weight against it in order to stop it rolling, to keep it rolling. The Littles had a grand piano in the living room, which was all right, except that one of the keys was a sticky key and didn't work properly. So this is the picture of him rolling that ping pong ball. So now we're talking about pianos, and they're saying the piano key was sticky and it didn't really work. So what do you think is going to happen? What do you think they're going to say? Mrs. Little said she thought it must be the damp weather, but I don't see how it could be the damp weather, for the key had been sticking for about 4 years, during which time there had been many bright, clear days. But anyway, the key stuck, and was a great inconvenience to anyone trying to play the piano. So inconvenience, that's a really, really big fancy word that's saying it kind of like annoyed people. It stopped people from being able to play the piano. It bothered George particularly when he was playing the scarf dance, which was rather lively. It was George who had the idea of stationing Stuart inside the piano to push the key up the second it was played. So there's Stuart, and George gave the idea that he goes inside the piano and pushes that key up every time they try to play it so that the piano works. So that seems like a pretty big job for him because he's so little, huh? This was no easy job for Stuart, as he had to crouch between the felt hammers so that he wouldn't get hit on the head. But Stuart liked it just the same. It was exciting inside the piano, dodging about. The noise was quite terrific. Sometimes after a long session, he would emerge quite deaf, so that means he couldn't hear anything, as though he had just stepped out of an airplane after a long journey, and it would be a little time before he really felt normal again. Mr. and Mrs. Little often discussed Stuart quietly between themselves when he wasn't around, for they never quite recovered from the shock and surprise of having a mouse in the family. He was so very tiny, and he presented so many problems to his parents. Mr. Little said that, for one thing, there must be no references to mice in their conversation. He made Mrs. Little tear from the nursery song book a page about the 3 blind mice see how they run. "I don't want Stuart to get a lot of notions in his head," said Mr. Little. "I should feel badly to have my son grow up fearing that a farmer's wife was going to cut off his tail with a carving knife. It is such things that make children dream bad dreams when they go to bed at night." Yes, replied Mrs. Little, and I think we had better start thinking about the poem, "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse." I think it might embarrass Stuart to hear mice mentioned in such a belittling manner. That's right, said her husband, but what shall we say when we come to that line in the poem? We'll have to say something. We can't just say, "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring." That doesn't sound complete. It needs a word to rhyme with house. What about louse? Asked Mrs. Little. Or grouse? Said Mr. Little. I suggest souse, remarked George, who had been listening to the conversation from across the room. It was decided that louse was the best substitute for mouse. So, when Christmas came around, Mrs. Little carefully rubbed out the word mouse from the poem and wrote in the word louse. And Stuart always thought the poem went this way. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a louse." The thing that worried Mr. Little most was the mouse hole in the pantry. This mouse hole, so he's going to tell us now why he's worried about that mouse hole. This hole had been made by some mice in the days before the Littles came to live in the house, and nothing had been done about stopping it up. Mr. Little was not at all sure that he understood Stuart's real feelings about a mouse hole. He didn't know where the hole led to, and it made him uneasy to think that Stuart might someday feel the desire to venture into it. So he's worried that Stuart Little might go into the mouse hole and go exploring, and that makes his dad feel worried. "After all, he does look a good deal like a mouse," said Mr. Little to his wife, "and I've never seen a mouse yet that didn't like to go into a hole." And that's the end of chapter 2. So we're learning a lot more about Stuart. We're learning how he interacts with his family. We're learning where he sleeps. In chapter 1, we learned that he sleeps in the bed that they made for him. That's a really small. And we're learning that he helps his family with a whole bunch of stuff. And in chapter 3, it's called Washing Up. So we're going to read something about washing up in chapter 3. After this video ends, I want you to go tell somebody in your family, or go tell your favorite stuffed animal, or go tell a sibling, what was your favorite part so far that you've learned about Stuart Little? What did you think was interesting about Stuart Little? What do you think was weird? What do you think was surprising? Was there anything you don't like about Stuart? Was there anything that you liked a lot? I want you to go tell them everything you think so far about what we know about Stuart Little.